Welcome back to Doireann TV. Right now I have Cedric Tille from the Graduate Institute of Geneva to have a look at capital flows. So Cedric, welcome today.
Thank you.
Now, first of all, can you just tell me about the recent econometric analysis that looks at the magnitude of the retrenchment of capital flows that is strongly connected to the extent in international financial integration?
Yes, so gives a pullback in time. We've seen since the mid-1990s a big rise in financial globalization. What this means concretely is the volume, magnitude of capital flows across borders has increased much faster than the gross domestic product. The striking point as we enter the crisis in 2007, but especially in 2008, is not only do these capital flows stop, they actually reverted. So investors who used to buy more and more foreign assets suddenly start selling them and retrenching to their domestic countries. A paper we have done with Maria Milesi-Ferretti of the IMF shows that this was primarily driven by banking cross-border holdings.
And there was 170 billion in capital flows to developing countries in the fourth quarter of last year. Now, why was this, and what do you expect for 2013?
So two main reasons in my view. First of all, there is some normalization of the situation. So the euro crisis is not as bad as it used to be. In fact, the FT was reporting this morning that we saw some revival of capital flows across Europe. We're nowhere near where we used to be. That's the first point. The second point is this crisis has really been a rich countries' crisis. Emerging markets, by contrast, have been relatively unaffected. They have only been affected in the 6 months after Lehman Brothers, but after that, capital flow resumed to this economy strongly. And if we look at growth prospects, such as the one put out by the IMF, emerging countries are actually doing quite well. It is the advanced economies, and Europe in particular, that are still lagging behind. So it's not a surprise that capital is actually flowing more to the emerging countries.
And Cedric, research from the IMF has shown that there's actually no evidence to prove that quantitative easing has a strong impact on capital flows or the prices of commodities. Now, what do you think?
So we wouldn't expect quantitative easing to affect, for instance, the volatility of capital flows. After all, quantitative easing is something that was put gradually in place. Of course, when it was actually implemented, it was a bit of a surprise, but not a complete one. What one could expect is, as financial conditions are very accommodative in advanced economies, which means rates of returns tend to be low, well, money is going to go towards emerging countries in search of higher yields. This has led to some pressure to the so-called currency wars, but it's natural to expect in a two-speed world where emerging countries grow faster than advanced economies that some exchange rate adjustment will take place, even though this is not always pleasant.
And what else do you think about capital flows? What do you expect for the rest of the year?
So it's hard to predict. We would expect, if there's no big crisis return in Europe, I would expect flows to resume to emerging economies as this keep going up. An interesting situation would be to see the US versus Europe. Projections are actually for stronger growth in the US. They have by no means made up for the lost ground in the crisis, not all of it, but the prospects are much healthier than in Europe. So if that persists, we could see a resumption of capital flows towards the US in search of better yields. The other interesting story to follow would be what happened within Europe. It's important to bear in mind that the euro crisis is not a crisis of the euro area vis-à-vis the rest of the world, but it's really an internal crisis with big waves of capital flowing from the north to the south until circa 2008 with a big reversal. So if this money can start flowing again, it will ease the crisis, but that's by no means a given.
Thank you very much, Cedric.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching Doireann TV. Now do stay tuned to the website for more interesting interviews and press views. But for now, goodbye.